Georgia Republican Kelly Loeffler is running her Senate campaign by attacking Reverend Raphael Warnock as a, quote, radical liberal. But she was completely okay with the church where he's the senior pastor, Ebenezer Baptist Church, where Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. preached when it worked for her politically. Earlier this year on MLK Day, with the supposedly radical Reverend Warnock sitting right behind her, Loeffler spoke from the church's pulpit, a prized public relations spot for Republicans in both parties on King Day, saying, quote, I am so humbled to be here with you today in this sacred place, surrounded by men and women who advance the cause of freedom. I'm joined now by Jamil Smith, senior writer at Rolling Stone, who was at Ebenezer Baptist Church when Ms. Loeffler spoke there on MLK Day, and Reverend Mark Thompson, host of Make It Plain. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here. I'm so glad that you guys were both available today. Jamil, you were there when Kelly Loeffler stood up on the pulpit of Ebenezer Baptist Church, which every politician runs to Georgia if they can to try to get in there. And was she talking about how radical Reverend Warnock was? Was she disparaging his preaching in that moment?
No, Joy. She was actually talking about Dr. King, as most politicians do when they stop by a black church. And they, the quote that she said was, essentially the 1957 quote that Dr. King said in Montgomery, Alabama. What are you doing for others? What are you doing for others? And so, what we see now is that Kelly Loeffler is not only, doing for President Trump and other Republicans what she should be doing for her constituents, but she's actually working to actively disenfranchise those constituents by supporting this deranged Texas lawsuit.
Mark, there is this, what I call a Muppetification of Dr. King, right? Where people, particularly on the right, love to use him like he's this Muppet. He's like the friendly Muppet. And he never said anything. But back in the day, these same people would have been calling King a radical, because what he was saying was that you had to have a radical change in American society to give black people equal rights, equal footing, the right to vote, the right to eat, wear in Woolworths, and also afford it. Like, he would have been considered a radical. I find it incredibly hypocritical that people like Kelly Loeffler and other Republicans are now making war on the black church after they said you can't touch Amy Coney Barrett's faith.
Well, first of all, happy birthday week, Joy. It's not only hip, but what they are doing is transparent. The irony that they are attacking the man who has inherited Dr. King's pulpit, just as Dr. King was attacked from that very same pulpit in Ebenezer. And then to attack the ritual, the liturgy of the black church, it's almost as if they want to take us back when we were enslaved and we had to go hide in hush harbors to worship. And the plantation owners would have to spy on us to make sure we weren't planning to escape. But the fact of the matter is, Georgians are planning to escape in January. And the real deal is, it's not about so much the religious practice as is the numbers. The devil is worried about the details. Organizations like the Black Church Political Action Committee knocked on over 30,000 doors leading up to November, called over 225,000 Georgians during the phone bank, and also are doing that again for the runoff. So that's what they're worried about. And the runoff was set up to be a discriminatory system, but it may not work out that way this time for Kelly Loeffler and Purdue. So they're afraid of the power of the black church, and that's the bottom line.
And, and Jamil, you've got Newt Gingrich attacking Stacey Abrams and claiming, the key to Republican victory is to have more votes than the left can steal, and implying that Stacey Abrams somehow stole Georgia for the Democrats. You have Georgia Republicans in the legislature saying, okay, we're never going to let these black people do this to us again. We're going to pass all these laws to make it nearly impossible to vote absentee next time. I think they're already reacting to the black constituency's decision-making in terms of voting by trying to suppress votes all over again, Brian Kemp style.
Right. Well, this is what happens when you have a party that's exclusively dedicated to disenfranchising those who don't vote for them. I mean, rather than actually making an argument or actually trying to serve Black communities, they'd actually rather try to make sure that these communities have less of access to the ballot or to the polls, what have you. So, frankly, I mean, you see them very comfortable, being able to show up in a church on MLK Day and espouse these values, but then they don't actually put those values into practice. And I think it's something that Reverend Warnock actually addressed that day when he said, frankly, that it's suspicious when politicians come in here and talk about these kinds of values, when in fact then they step out of these church doors and they don't do the same thing. So if we want to talk about values and who's upholding Christian morals and what have you, you're gonna have to look a little bit further than some sermon that they're going to twist the words of. They have to look into the practice. And frankly, Georgians should be looking at what these people are doing for them rather than what they are saying.
Absolutely. And Mark, maybe these churches ought to be a little bit more discriminating in terms of who they let come in the door and get on the pulpit, because it's not easy to get on the pulpit of a Black church. Maybe they shouldn't just let these politicians walk in here and use these churches to politic, because they obviously don't respect to the Black church, and they're making war on the Black. I consider this to be a war against the Black church, and everybody who is a Black Christian ought to really think about that. But I want to turn a little bit to a different subject, meaning the Democrats here for a moment, Mark. So imminently, apparently, Joe Biden is going to nominate Mr. Vilsack, Tom Vilsack, who to be, let me just read a little thing. This is from the NBC News. In leaked recordings, Biden said the GOP, he went after the defund the police stuff. He says, don't use the, whole defund the police thing. But he also talked about nominating former Agricultural Secretary Vilsack to his old position. And we all know and remember, and you and I have talked about the fact that what we know Vilsack as is the guy who fired Shirley Sherrod. She was an agricultural department official who was forced to resign after Breitbart basically ran a disinformation campaign against her. Vilsack is the one who fired her. She is a legend in Georgia. She's a civil rights legend, she and her husband. What do you make of the fact that Joe Biden seems prepared to nominate this man, despite that, when they need votes in Georgia?
I am baffled by it, quite frankly. He's already been there for 8 years. I interviewed Lloyd Wright, the former head of the Office of Civil Rights at the Department of Agriculture, this evening. It'll air on my podcast in the morning. And we talked about all of the things that Vilsack did, not only firing Shirley Sherrod, not really helping the Pickford settlement be distributed to most farmers. Most Black farmers who lost their land only got $50,000. You can't rebuild a farm with that. And remember, Barack Obama himself called the U.S. Department of Agriculture the last plantation while Tom Vilsack was there. He actually said that, President Obama. So for him to go back, and let me tell you something Lloyd Wright said to me just this evening. He said that he's talking with Georgians, and there's still some Black farmers in Georgia, and they're saying, well, why should we vote for Democrats if the Democratic president is going to reappoint Tom Vilsack to be the Secretary of Agriculture? So just as in the meeting with the legacy organizations, so to speak, the legacy civil rights organizations, Biden said, defund hurt Democrats, and there was only so much he was going to do. He didn't want to hurt the Georgia runoffs. The message for Joe Biden tonight is renominating Tom Vilsack itself might hurt the Georgia runoffs.
Absolutely. It makes no political sense whatsoever. They didn't seem to know who Shirley Sherrod was when Tom Vilsack fired her the first time. And apparently they don't remember her now. And they think that's going to help them in Georgia. Sorry, I think that is absolutely insane. But you know what? They don't listen to me. They're just doing what they want. Jamil Smith, Reverend Mark Thompson, thank you both very much.